Our second keynote speaker of this forum will present corporate governance considerations during COVID-19. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Seamus Gillen, international speaker, founder and director of Value Alpha Limited.
With you, and thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this inaugural webinar in Bahrain. Congratulations on such a good initiative by BIBF and the Central Bank of Bahrain. Well done. Thank you. Thank you very much to His Excellency for a very interesting explanation of what is happening in Bahrain. Many of you will know the UK, many of you will know London. You will know that with COVID-19, we have suffered quite badly. We have nearly 45,000 deaths in the UK, and it has been a crisis for us. So congratulations to Bahrain for what you have done for managing to keep the virus under control with so few deaths. That's a very big achievement. Well done. So I'm going to be talking about governance now, and what the governance considerations are during this period of the virus, COVID-19. The virus is a massive disruptor to global systems, to business systems, to society, to communities all over the world. And we have a crisis on our hands. And what I want to be able to share with you are some thoughts about what you need to do in terms of your governance when a situation like this occurs. There will be more crises in the future. There may be another virus, there may be a second wave, there may be new viruses, and we're learning lessons now about how to react and how to organize ourselves better. So I want to share some thoughts with you, and I want you to think about what this means for you as organizations and how you organize yourself better. The first thing to say is that we're talking here about the creation of value. Organizations are there to create value, whether you are in the banking, financial services sector, or the public sector, the state sector. We are all there to create value. Value is created by the strength of our business model, but it is protected. Value is protected by the strength of our governance. Okay, so when we move to a situation of crisis, we need to recognize very explicitly that we are moving from a position of steady state into crisis, and then we move on to the new normal. What does a new normal look like? We were talking about that already. New ways of working, more efficient ways of working, changing public behavior, changing customer behavior. The important point is when we are in a crisis, we need to recognize that and do things differently. So governance is about the way in which we organize ourselves. So we need to think about how do we organize ourselves differently? What needs to change? Okay, so even though Bahrain may have managed to control the virus, maybe the same is the fact in the Gulf and in that part of the world, but generally the whole of the world has been upset very badly by the virus, and you will be trading with and interacting with other parts of the world which have been very badly affected. And you need to think about how do we change the way in which we organize ourselves. That's governance. So the purpose of the organization, as I said a moment ago, is for any organization is to create value. And then the purpose of governance is to protect that value and ensure that that value does not get frittered away, does not get destroyed, particularly under the current circumstances of crisis. One of the things, therefore, we need to do inside our organisations is look again at the purpose of the board and the role of the management team, because to manage through crisis requires a different set of skills and different kinds of experience. And there are two things that we're seeking to achieve in this. The first of all is to survive, okay? It's actually to get through this crisis, to get through the virus and to emerge on the other side still healthy. But also we need to think very carefully about how do we position ourselves during the crisis? How do we position ourselves to come out of the crisis and to continue to be relevant to our stakeholders? And if we have shareholders, to continue to satisfy our shareholders. So we are looking to organize ourselves to survive, and we are looking to position ourselves properly in society and in the market so that after the crisis, we can continue to take advantage of new opportunities. And so we're talking about long-term sustainability. What that requires is for the board and senior management to sit down and say, what does the future look like? How are we going to get there? And how do we need to change the way in which we're working now to ensure that we succeed? Okay, so one of the things that we need to do is look at this relationship between the board and the management team and have the discussion between board directors and the senior management team about how are we going to work together for the next few months during this crisis. Now, normally best practice governance would suggest that the board and the management team are in the middle of this diagram. It's a partnership, it's a team game. This is where the management team and the board of directors are working closely together. That situation might have to change during a time of crisis. And this is a diagram that might help you think about how you might need to change the relationship between the management team and the board of directors. I'm not suggesting that any particular box here is the perfect box, but what I am saying is that you shouldn't be carrying on as normal as if nothing had happened. You need to have this discussion with your board or if you're a director, with your management team to check that the way in which you are acting together is the way that you wish to continue to act together. Okay, so this is the first point, that the board and the management team have to decide how are we going to get through this crisis together, who is going to do what, and how are we going to change the way in which we're working. Okay. One of the key things to think about is how will you take decisions differently. The way in which you take decisions under steady state will not be good enough for the way you need to take decisions in a period of crisis. And the most important role of a board is to take decisions, is to take high quality strategic decisions which move the business on towards a future of sustainable success. And the management team is part of that community of taking decisions, working with the board to take decisions. So how will you take decisions differently? What you need to be looking at, and I'm sure a lot of you have done this already, is how do you change the way in which you're holding your management team meetings and your board meetings? Are you holding them more frequently? What's the nature of those team meetings? What special purpose structures do you need to set up which recognizes that you are in a state of crisis? What do we need to do differently? What do we need to change about the way in which we are preparing management information, MI, or market intelligence, MI? What does the board pack look like? The way the board pack looked in steady state is not the way the board pack should look in a period of crisis. How do we need to change the way in which we're preparing for these top level meetings with the board of directors, but also the senior management team in terms of taking decisions quickly? We need to understand in a period of crisis that levels of director commitment, and by director I mean board director, I mean senior management team members. The level of director commitment needs to change. People need to turn up, and that doesn't mean just physically turn up, but mentally turn up and tune up, become more intense about keeping the business on the road. If you're working longer hours, that is the cost of trying to survive during a period of crisis. How do you need to change your meeting agendas and the way in which you transact your business? How do you invest in the management team to keep them fresh, to support the management team during this period of difficulty? These are the kind of things we need to think about in terms of how will decisions be taken differently. So for example, your resilience model, what you normally do to think about your resilience of the business model is not something necessarily that the board would normally have at the top of the agenda during a period of steady state. During a period of crisis, you need to revisit your resilience model. So this is the organization's capacity to anticipate disruption and adapt to events. And it's not only coping in the face of internal or external change, but adapting and surviving into the future. And His Excellency suggested that there needs to be change to survive into the future. So when you are facing these changes to the environment, you have to decide, can you manage those changes to the environment, or is the change in the environment so strong that you need to change the way you're organizing yourselves? So that is what I mean when I go back and talk about special purpose structures. What do you need to be doing differently now in a period of crisis? So one of the things you might be doing differently is you may be putting issues of resilience at the top of the agenda when they normally would not be there. So for example, you might want to use a model. This is a model from the International Consortium of Organizational Resilience. It's a very good model which explains how you begin to cope in a period of crisis like during COVID-19 in terms of changing the way in which you run and organize your business. This is just one model. There are many other models out there. The point I want to make is that normally as a management team or as a board, you would not normally be looking at this model, because if the business is in steady state, there's people deep down in the business who are looking after resilience, looking after risk management, looking after business continuity. But during a period of crisis, you need to change the agenda, you need to change the conversation at management team and at board level and start discussing issues which are about the future survival of the business. So a model like this may suddenly be the kind of model you're looking at rather than leaving to more middle management or junior management in the organization. Another important area to look at is strategy and risk. My experience is that most boards do not spend enough time looking at strategy, and some boards do not do risk very well. Strategy and risk are part of the same coin. They are part of the story of value creation and value protection. Now, my argument is that boards should always be spending more time on risk, or as much time as possible on risk, and also even more time on strategy. So one of the things you will be wanting to look at is, to what degree do you change the organization's strategic vision during a period of crisis? To what extent do you want to change the organization's appetite for risk during a period of crisis? And then marrying the strategic vision with the risk appetite, taking decisions based on getting through the next few weeks, the next few months, and for however long the virus takes. Because again, you may be coping okay in Bahrain, but you will be interacting with organizations in other countries, in the GCC, in other markets around the world, which are not coping so well. So you need to think again about your strategic vision and your risk appetite. And these are the kinds of conversation which maybe you would not normally have during a period of steady state, but which you need to begin to have during a period of crisis. Now, I'm going to be speaking for about another 15 minutes, but I hope that some of you might have some questions that you might want to ask, and I'll try and leave a period at the end of my presentation so that some of you, if you wish to, can ask me some questions. Okay, so what are the priorities? Now, many of you will have discovered this already, but just to make the point in case we haven't, which is that the first things that the management team needs to be doing and working with the board and advising the board on is how bad is the problem, what is the scale, the pace, and the depth of action required to change our business model, to cope and to survive. That means looking at the entire business system and looking at where the vulnerabilities are, where the supply chain issues are, where the staff issues are, people falling ill with the virus, not being able to come into work and so on. The immediate focus is on cash. The immediate focus is on cash management to deliver liquidity and solvency. What does that mean in terms of risk management? Controlling the controllables. What can you control? Control them. And what you cannot control, prepare the organization if those risks materialize. As His Excellency was implying, there then comes a moment where you can begin to see opportunities. How is the world changing? How are we going to take advantage of this? Now, the virus has changed our perception completely of how we work, completely about the use of technology, which is what we're using today. For today's virtual seminar, for the webinar. But we're also going to see evolving customer preferences. Will you be ready to anticipate those changes in customer preferences? Because if you're working in a competitive market, your competitors will be positioning themselves. And then therefore, finally, how are you going to reposition the organization in terms of its place in society, its reputation, its place in the market, its brand? So the two key strategic objectives are survival and repositioning going forward. And that is what the governance system should be supporting in terms of the way you are spending your scarce and precious and important management time in coping with the crisis. Okay. So what I want to show you in the minutes that we've got remaining is the kind of issues that you as a management team, and maybe if you're a director, a board director also, as a member of your board, that you should be spending during this period of crisis. Now we're looking here at how have things changed rather than being in a position of steady state. So there are three areas of activity which as a management team, my view is you should be focused on as we go through this period of crisis. The first is what I call situational awareness. And in this next slide, that is an awareness of your wider environment as a management team. The second area I call performance excellence, which is as a management team, your awareness of your operations and your operational readiness, your ability to execute. And thirdly, I call the third area reflective mindfulness, which is your awareness as a management team of your capability and your competence and your ability to deliver. So in the last few minutes I'm with you, and again, I hope there might be a little bit of time for Q&A, questions and answers. And otherwise, I very much look forward to the lifting of the various quarantine periods and getting back to see you in Bahrain and being with you again. I miss Bahrain and I look forward to getting back to you. But let's look at these areas. What has changed about what the management team and what the board of directors should be thinking about. Okay, so the first 4 areas I'm going to put to you is that as a management team, you need to be acutely aware of the legal and regulatory context within which you are working, and make sure you do not drop that ball during this period of crisis. There are no prizes for breaking the law, breaking the rules, breaking regulations, even in a period of crisis. If you do that during this period, there will be sanctions, there will be people coming after you afterwards. So your first priority is actually to stay legal, to stay compliant, and to work within the regulatory regimes. Okay. I suggest that the second area that you want to be focused on is how do you deliver the accountabilities to those who are providing you with your money, your investors, your shareholders, and how do you deliver accountability to your wider stakeholders? They want to know how you are coping. They want to know what you are doing to survive. They want to know what you are doing to continue to serve them as staff, as clients, as providers of relationship finance and so on. So what is the accountability, and are you getting better at your accountability during this period of crisis? Thirdly, do you have a performance culture inside the management team and inside the boardroom that is going to lead you through this crisis? This is where I talk about directors and management stepping up, turning up, and tuning up, becoming stronger leaders, because crisis requires leadership. And fourthly, on this slide, how good are you at protecting the franchise? How good are you at protecting the brand and your reputation in society and in Bahrain? You are very good at protecting your reputation in society and giving back to society. You mustn't take your eye off the ball in a period of crisis. You need to keep focused on your franchise and be jealously guarding your franchise and jealously protecting your brand and your reputation. So I hope that makes sense. The second area that I want to talk about is performance excellence and operational readiness. This is what requires you as a management team to decide, is the strategy still good enough during crisis as it was during steady state? And then focus obsessively on revising the strategy, the business model, and the operational model. Because if you don't, and your competitor does, they will take your clients, they will take your customers away from you. Okay, so you need to revisit your strategic vision, critically important. Associated with that, and it goes to a slide I showed before, you need to revisit your risk management capability. Are you controlling your risks? And particularly, what is the health of your controls regime? Particularly if you have staff working from home, have you got enough controls in place? Do you have enough risk management capability in place to protect the assets, to protect the value you're creating? Thirdly, what are you doing as a management team to be directing your staff, the middle management, and the people at the bottom? We talk about tone from the top. That's the tone from the board and the C-suite. But we also need to think about the mood in the middle and the buzz at the bottom. So you are responsible for the tone at the top. What are you doing to provide direction and control to the mood in the middle management, and the buzz at the bottom, the staff? And are you holding people to account for their performance during this period of crisis? Fourthly, are you making sure that there are sufficient resources in place inside the business to cope during this period of crisis, and particularly in relation to your human capital, to your talent, to your people? Are you keeping an eye on your people? Are you looking after them? Are you keeping them safe because you are reliant on them? You rely on them to keep the business model going. So this is something very important for you to be aware of. And the third area of activity that I would recommend that you should be thinking in terms of your organizational arrangements, in terms of your governance, is making sure that you have the right mix of skills, experience, and knowledge, and of the people around at the top of the business to address the challenges facing the organization. Some people call that bench strength. It's a term that comes from the US. Do you have the right people at the top to manage the crisis? If you haven't, what are you going to do about it? Secondly, don't forget about your ethical leadership and display an awareness and communicate throughout the business your purpose. Why are we here? What are we here to do? What are we here to deliver? Why do we deserve to survive? And the vision, the mission, the values, the behaviors, and the culture. If you let go of this stuff, you will not come out of the crisis okay. And if you find that you've experienced difficulty in this area, then it's possible that that will feed through to the products and services that you are delivering to your customers and to your stakeholders. And if that deteriorates, your customers and your stakeholders will give their loyalty to another organization. Thirdly, reflect on whether you're taking good decisions. Take some time out. Are you taking decisions quickly enough? Are they based on high quality data, knowledge of the business? Are we doing what is our critical role as members of the management team, as members of the board? Are we taking good decisions quickly to steer us through the crisis? Think carefully about your governance arrangements. What do you need to do differently about the way you are organizing yourselves and the way you are structuring yourselves to get through the crisis? And finally, continually embrace evaluation of your effectiveness and your performance. Be honest with yourselves. Take time out and think, how are we doing? Are we doing well? Are we doing badly? What do we need to change? How much more quickly do we need to take decisions? What different ways do we need to organize ourselves to continue to stay in position as we come out of the crisis? So remember, the two strategic imperatives are to survive in terms of the financial stability of the business, and then to be positioned for when you come out of the crisis, so that you can re-enter your market, you can re-enter society, and you still have your loyal following of stakeholders, of shareholders, of customers, of staff. These are the things which, from an organizational perspective, I have seen go wrong in boards around the world. And I will know some of you on this call because I've been to Bahrain a lot. I've been around the world a lot. What I am sharing with you in these 3 slides are the kinds of things that go wrong even in steady state. And in times of crisis, there is an increased risk that these things will go wrong. And if you don't stay focused on these areas, there's a risk that the value you are creating will get destroyed. And that will leave you in a very difficult position moving on into the future. So look, I know it's difficult. I wish you really well. You're all in positions of high levels of responsibility. Life is tough. The times are tough. This is not easy, but if you can organize yourselves better, you will come out of this okay. And then the hard work will have been worth it. So that's me finished for now. I think I am pretty much on time. And my colleagues at BIBF, if there's anything that we should be talking about now, if anybody has any questions, I would love to hear. I'm very happy to answer questions. My presentations can certainly be shared with participants. I hope you find it useful because I think there's a lot of good stuff in there, even if I do say so myself. So colleagues, thank you very much for your time. I look forward to being back with you in Bahrain again in the future.